From Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
Welcome to the broadcast. George Ginescu, the good doctor, who hosts the show preceding mine, Big Band Sunday night, here at the Blowtorch Station, AM 740, Toronto, Canada, always says the same thing to me as he's leaving the studio, making his way down the corridor to his car, and that is, don't do anything until I get to my car. He's a wonderful booster for the show, wonderful supporter, listens as he drives all the way up the 400 to his home in Barrie. And so what I'm doing is I'm stalling so George can get into his car because he doesn't like to miss anything. Listen, let me take this opportunity to remind you that you can follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Richard Syrett, all one word. Let me spell my last name. 20 years in the business, and I'm still spelling my last name. It's S as in Simon, Y-R-E-T-T. And when you get there, you'll find, now this is biblical, folks. The Revelations talks about the second coming and the end times and war, the signs, right? The signs that the end times are coming. They are nigh. Wars and rumors of war and extreme weather and so forth. I'll have to double check the good book. I don't know if it said anything about giant eyeballs washing ashore, but this is what has happened in Pompano Beach, in Florida. A man walking along the beach there, Pompano Beach, he found a giant eyeball. And now the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission are investigating. It was found on Wednesday. And I swear to God, you'll see a picture of it. A man or a woman wearing surgical gloves. And, of course, if you're holding a giant eyeball, who wouldn't wear surgical gloves? But this thing it looks very fresh, if I can use that term. And, I mean, the eye is not clouded over. There's no sign of a cataract or anything. And this is the size of a softball or a very large grapefruit. So one has to ask, what skull did that fall out of? What enormous sea creature is one eye short? An assistant biology professor at Florida International University in Miami said the blue eyeball may have come from a deep-sea squid or a large swordfish. That's one large swordfish, I gotta tell you. Anyway, check it out. Giant eyeball found on beach, and that and many more stories I've tweeted. And you can also follow my Twitter by logging onto the website richardsyrett.com. Now, never been accused of being the king of segues, but show of hands, how many here have seen the new movie Looper? Tim in the other room has seen it. And your thoughts, Tim? A thumbs up, thumbs down? Well, you sort of tentative. So. All right, and those who haven't, I have not seen it. I'll wait till it comes out on DVD. It stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Joe, this assassin. He kills his targets that are sent back to him in time by the mob, which is a rather nefarious use of a time machine. But it's interesting because, time travel has always been this staple of science fiction, and this latest rendition is showing up in this film Looper. And now scientists are saying that it's quite possible. It's quite possible. It's consistent with the law of physics to change the rate at which clocks run. And most scientists or physicists think it's possible to go forward. Actually, it's been proven you can go forward. They've done, they did a study with these two atomic clocks, and one was on the ground and one was in a very fast-moving jet. And the one that was moving around at a higher speed in the jet, actually, I believe that clock was slower than the one on the ground, right? Just by nanoseconds, thus proving, you can travel into the future. Traveling into the past, of course, is an entirely other kettle of fish. And physicists are saying, in order to travel into the past, you would need you'd need the energy, enough energy that would require about half the mass of the universe. And then, and just one other little thing, it would probably destroy the universe in the process. But that's a minor point. So there's still hope out there that we could travel into the past. Now, on this program, in the past, I've interviewed a very interesting gentleman out of the University of Connecticut, a physics professor by the name of Ronald Mallett, who has been working on a theoretical time machine for many years. And there's some stumbling blocks. He needs funding, and there may or may not be some problems with his theory. But lo and behold, there is someone else out there who is contending for the crown of the first time machine. And we're going to speak to him right now. Marshall Barnes is a research and design engineer and a member of the Philosophy of Time Society. He's a conceptual theorist with a specialty in theoretical physics and cognition related to creativity and technologically induced modes of perception. That's quite a mouthful. We'll find out what that means. He's a member of the Philosophy of Time Society, as I say, National STEM Foundation, and the 9 Sigma Open Invitation Organization. On June 14th of this year, he was named EdUtopia, edutopia.org featured member of the week, and was accepted as a member of the 1,000 Scientists in 1,000 Days program, Scientific American magazine. That same month, he's currently promoting science, technology, engineering, arts, and math agenda, but he's here to tell us about his race to build the very first working time machine. Marshall Barnes, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. All right. So let's first of all, settle this for me, because I've always been confused. I've heard physicists who say that Einstein's theory of relativity does not allow for time travel. And I've heard those who say, well, yes, it does. Now, your theory, your theoretical time machine is actually based on Einstein's theory of relativity, is it not?
No,
it's not.
It's based on his unfinished unified field theory.
On his unified field theory. Okay.
Right. It's his unfinished one. He never actually solved it, and so we have to consider it, unfinished. But it's his unified field theory of electromagnetism and gravity, or what you might call distant parallelism or teleparallelism. But it's not general relativity. Most physicists, when it comes to time travel, actually have a very pedestrian and shallow knowledge of the subject, which is why people like Ed Farhi of MIT, which is where that one quote came from about, well, it would take, half the energy of the universe and it would probably destroy it, that kind of thing. They're running equations out of general relativity. And general relativity allows for some very unique and interesting things, except that they're very difficult to accomplish. And, by the way, for your audience who may not be aware of this, general relativity was first put together back in 1915. So you're talking about physicists who are still talking about a theory that's almost 100 years old, okay?
Right.
So, it's kind of like, hello, can you come up with something else in the meantime,
One would think. Marshall, let me ask you also to go gentle with us, fair listeners, because, most of us are, if they're anything like me, they basically barely got through, I think, grade 10 physics. So let's try and keep it, and this is actually something that you're very good at. I've seen you on YouTube, and you're a master at this. You are
I'm just asking me a question.
Yeah, I've seen you on YouTube. You're a master at making complex ideas very simple and crystal clear, which is one of the reasons we have you on the program.
Yeah.
So your theoretical time machine, how does it work? How would it work?
Okay. First of all, unlike Dr. Mallett, who I happen to know personally, it is not like just a design, and I'm saying theoretically, if we get this built, maybe it'll be a time machine. It is an actual machine that is approaching the first stage requirement to be a time machine. Okay? What has happened is it utilizes a specially synthesized electromagnetic signal, or actually an electronic signal, that then when it hits a metal becomes an electromagnetic field. And that field has certain special properties. The main one is that it grabs space as it moves through space and contracts it, and thus it causes acceleration. Essentially, it is like the first functioning prototype for warp drive. Now, we've done a number of experiments with this thing in a linear fashion, whether we put them on vehicles going down the road or we did gravity drops, and it always caused acceleration. But the idea came up with was basically, what happens if we have it going around and around? In other words, rotating, so it's moving, but it's moving like in a fixed position. That's when you have some very interesting ideas come up. And essentially, like, for example, Samir Mathura from Ohio State University, who's a physicist in the area of general relativity, said, well, if you do that and it acts the way you think it might act, you might have to start thinking about, Cauchy horizons developing and things of this nature.
What does that
which
mean?
Are normally attributed to like black holes. You have a region where, on the other side of it, it's an area where you can't say, well, this is where all this came from, what's on the other side. It kind of breaks causality down.
I don't know what that means, though. I mean, are you
in other words, cause and effect.
Okay.
Stops happening the way you would believe. Okay.
Are you saying that you could create a black hole with this thing?
No. That's what Samir Mathur was saying that we should start thinking about if an extreme model, the extreme version of this idea, before we even try to do it, was going to take place. And at that stage, it was purely theoretical. It was just like, what should we expect? And so I went out to Pasadena for the Mars Society conference back in just this past August, and I was out there with some pretty brainy people, and we were all sitting around at the banquet table one night, and I told them about this idea I had about applying this signal to a metal fan so that signal would then become an electromagnetic field spinning with that fan and then make that fan contract space, and he would start to get these possible interesting effects.
So the signal would oscillate in the same motion as the fan.
Right. In other words, the signal would become an electromagnetic field enveloping the fan blades.
Right.
And because the fan blades are spinning around and around, they would be contracting space as they move through space. So what would happen then is that space would not have the opportunity to expand back because here comes another blade.
Right.
And then before that gets to be, finished reacting to that, here goes another blade. So then you would have this idea of like, well, it starts contracting toward the center.
Okay, Marshall, let me just jump in here. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
We've got the music percolating up here. Let's just...
Okay.
You've just dropped a bomb on us. People are saying, wait a minute. What is this guy saying? Let's find out. Let's come back, gather ourselves, and continue to discuss the race to build the first time machine with Marshall Barnes, who may be close. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Serrett.
Calling all time travelers, vampire slayers, and alien abductees. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett continues.
Welcome back, friends. Marshall Barnes is with us. He's in a race to build the first time machine. And he's explaining how this will work. Now, describe to me what this thing looks like.
Oh, right now, it's a simple metal fan. It's not very big, but it has a cable attached to it. It's not attached to the motor. It's attached to actually part of the housing that then basically what happens is when we send the signal to this particular portion of the fan, it's then conducted to the axle and then it goes to the fan blades. And we've tested it to make sure, in fact, I did a conductivity test before I even tried to do anything else with it. And essentially what that was is you hook it up to a stereo, and then you take a speaker with a speaker wire coming off the back of it,
mm-hmm.
and then you touch it to the different parts of the fan while the stereo is running. And if you hear music, with high fidelity, then you've got a really good, conductive connection there. And that's how we tested it out before I started doing, any real experiments with it. So that's basically what the setup allows you to do. What effects we're getting already are, number one, and this is the most important one, we're getting an acceleration of the fan. What happens is if you turn the fan on and you use a strobe light to try to make it look like it's slowed down by setting this rate on the strobe light.
Right, you're putting a load on the current. So once you add a load, then because of the laws of conservation of energy, the blades should, according to the present laws of physics, should slow down. Right?
No.
No?
No. Okay. The slowdown part has to do with the same principles of a timing light when a mechanic works on a car.
Okay.
You've got the strobe light flash and you're trying to think. And I'm not a mechanic, but I know that there's something with like the timing belt or whatever. They're trying to get something to sync up so they know that everything's running right.
Okay.
All right. So what we're doing with the strobe light is we're flashing the strobe light at the fan.
Oh, I see.
And then we
okay.
adjust the rate so it looks like the fan's not moving. The the fan's still moving. If you put your finger in, it's not going to be good. But if the fan's still moving, but it just looks like it's not moving because of the flicker rate of the strobe light.
Right.
Okay? So it has nothing to do with the load or anything like
I
that.
understand
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
Because we're not doing anything to the motor of this fan.
Got it. Okay.
So what happens then is when you get it look like it's not moving, and then you turn on the field, and all of a sudden it breaks out of that frozen position, that means, guess what?
The blades
it's
are
moving faster.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. So that was the one thing we did. The other thing we did was we were shining a light at it and in a dark room, and we noticed when the field's activated that it seems like some of the light starts to disappear, and we don't know why. Okay. Now, before I can make a guesstimate about that, I have to do a test to see whether or not if it has anything to do with the fact that the fan blades are moving faster, so it might affect the reflectivity that's going on with the light hitting the fan blades. But we can definitely see that there is a decrease in the light that's reflecting off of the blades.
So Marshall, if you were to place something inside this field that's been created by the oscillating fan blades in conjunction with this signal, what do you suspect would happen to that object?
Well, okay, right now, not a whole lot, aside from the fact that we got a high velocity fan going and it's blowing all kinds of air, okay? So, but the thing about it is that eventually what we want to do is raise the power, because we're working with maybe 50 watts at the most, okay? Now we can get our hands on an amplifier. It's an expensive one, but we could, it's available. We could get our hands on an amplifier that's 14,000 watts per channel. Now, along with the fact that we have, the other thing that's interesting is that when you look at this fan when the field's turned on, you don't really see anything that radical with your naked eye. But if you turn up the monitor, a video monitor, after you've shot footage of it, you get a ring of color. It's like green, and that's just normal. It just comes off that way. But then when the field's activated, all of a sudden you see this stream of yellow coming into it. And we're like, what is that? We're still trying to figure what that is. But that's something else that's indicating that there's something really different going on here. But again, we're only dealing with 50 watts output. So if you can imagine increasing the power by like 300 times, I mean, you can just kind of think, well, we might be at that point, maybe even before that point, be approaching what you might call science fiction level effects.
Okay, but explain to me why you believe that you are actually creating a time machine and not just blowing air around at incredibly high rates.
Well, because what we're seeing, the effects that we're seeing have nothing to do with the air.
Okay.
That's why. For example, the acceleration of the fan has nothing to do with blowing air. It's blowing air anyway.
Right.
So, and also the thing about it is if we, just like Ronald Mallett with his rotating ring laser, he thinks that if by having this laser go around, it's going to start to twist space and time, and then he'll start to get closed kind of like curves, and he'll have a time machine.
Right.
Well, we know that space is being affected by this field. That's what's causing the acceleration of the fan.
Okay.
So if we crank it up with enough power, then we will start to twist space and time, and then we will eventually get closed time-like curves. I mean, it's just a matter of doing the math on it. The key is that this field does something that is akin to what Einstein was talking about with his unified field theory of electromagnetism and gravity. That we have an electromagnetic field that is creating a gravitic effect. In other words, it's exhibiting the kind of properties you expect if electromagnetism and gravity were coupled together in some fashion. And there's other physicists who've been looking at this idea, but the big difference is that they're trying to make the electromagnetic field take on these properties after the field has been created. Whereas my approach was synthesizing something from the very beginning, so that when the field is created, it's already doing what you want it to do.
When you say you've synthesized this field, what are the properties of this electrical signal that you're sending to the fan?
Okay, what's going on is that it's a special, like I said, specially synthesized signal, and it's created in a way that because my background's in music, okay, and video and things like that, and so. I remember when synthesizers were all these buttons and patch cords and things like that. So I understand synthesis. Most physicists don't, okay? So the situation is such that, and this is a proprietary area for obvious reasons, but the basic idea was that I was interested in what interesting things special electromagnetic fields could do. One of my first experiments was I created a rotating electromagnetic field that was basically had a TV set, not so much in the middle of it, but kind of in the middle of the loop, not in the center, but like part of the loop that was going on. And basically what it succeeded in doing, it was completely breaking down all the filtering mechanisms so that I was able to basically capture cell phone calls and all kinds of communications that shouldn't have been coming through the TV set. And at the same time this is happening, on the screen, you see nothing but white. And it's white that's slowly undulating, like you're looking down the surface of a glass of milk and somebody just kind of gently knocks it a little bit just to make it ripple.
Right.
And that's what was on the screen. And then at one point, another time I was doing one of these experiments, one of the things I was interested in was signals traveling through space. As you well know, being in radio, all these radio signals and TV signals from the years are just flying out in outer space. So I was interested in finding out whether or not it might be possible to capture one of these things from the past. And one day, lo and behold, I got this old movie on the TV while I was running one of these experiments. I got all excited and everything at first, but then it went to commercial, and it was like, it was a modern-day commercial.
Ah, okay. So
what
it wasn't
actually done was I had picked up a TV station from a long distance away that I really shouldn't have been able to pick up at all. So that was, it wasn't what I was really looking for, but it was very interesting nonetheless.
Now this machine that you're working on, this time machine that you're working on,
right?
What's the game plan here? Do you think that within your lifetime you could send information forwards in time, or an actual person forwards in time?
Okay, we're not going forward. This is because we're going to be creating closed time-like curves. This is about the past. It's not about sending anything to the future at all. You sincerely believe it is possible to travel backwards in time? Okay. Several things. One, yes. Two, there's more than one way of trying to do it. But I'm just saying, just basically within the context of what we're doing, based on what Mallett was talking about, although using a completely different approach, we're talking about being able to create closed time-like curves, which would then send something backward to the past.
Okay.
So that's the model. We're not trying to send anything to the future. It might be theoretically possible to do that, but that's further down the road, and we would have to take a slightly different approach.
Would you be sending information to the past or people?
Okay. The first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be seeing photons disappear and then electrons, and then so you can call that information if you want. Then it'd be a situation where we'll just start slowly scaling everything up. So before we try to send somebody, first of all, we have to know what's going on the other end, okay? But eventually, let's say in the long view, in fact, I've already had people say that they would volunteer to go. But it's a process whereby we would slowly scale up, see what happens, see how well the whole operation works. And then you start sending live things back, like maybe a roach or something like that, or, a hamster, and then it gets up to a lizard, or, the normal scientific way you do these kind of things, like when they were putting animals up in outer space before they put,
right.
a man.
Right.
It's the same kind of approach.
Let me ask you a question that may on the surface seem silly, but sometimes I ask those types of questions.
That's fine.
How do we know the past exists? Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it certainly does make sense. One way of looking at it is the block universe model, okay? And in the block universe model, everything that's ever happened and is going to happen is already all laid out, okay? So the short version of this whole thing is essentially looking at it as everything's the past. If the block universe model has any kind of validity whatsoever, that means everything's already happened. It's just that we're in the middle of it. It's like, for example, if you have a DVD and it's got, alternate versions on it and all this kind of stuff. On that DVD, everything's already happened, but when you put it in your player and you watch it, it's not already happened to you yet because you're in the middle of watching the DVD.
Right.
But it's already all there.
Okay.
So that's one way of looking at the whole thing about the past. And the other thing about it is that, physicists have seen equations that would suggest that you could go backwards in time, and that's where it comes from. So, and I want to point out one thing. One of the problems with dealing with concepts about time travel is that the original ideas about time travel came from science fiction stories.
H.G. Wells.
Exactly, right. And so inherently you have all kinds of ideas in there that don't make sense if you try to apply it to the real world. like paradoxes, okay? There are no paradoxes in any real time travel scenarios because it's real easy to see why that wouldn't happen. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is one of them.
Okay, let me just explain like a paradox. A typical paradox is the problem with traveling to the past is, let's say I travel back to 1951 and I prevent my parents inadvertently from getting married and thus having children, and thus I wouldn't exist. So that's a paradox. Or I accidentally run over my great-great-grandfather with an ox cart in, 1805, so that my grandfather wouldn't be born, my father wouldn't be born, and so on. These are called paradoxes.
Right.
You're saying that's not a problem with traveling backwards in time.
Right, exactly.
And explain
why? Because when you go back in time, first let me start out from a scientific foundation. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics says that you only get one outcome per measurement, okay? So to apply that to the real world, the one measurement that's already happened is like all this stuff with your, ancestors, and you are here, okay? So that's a given. If you go back in time, and this is where it becomes very important, the mere act of traveling back to the past is a different outcome because it didn't happen the first time around. So that automatically says, okay, something's different here, all right? Then anything else that you do while you're back there, it's also obviously a different outcome. So you have to be in a parallel universe. It's not the same timeline.
So technically, are you traveling backwards in time, or are you simply jumping to another dimension?
In other words, okay, anybody that talks about paradoxes within the context of time travel doesn't know anything seriously about time travel. That's just the way it is.
Okay.
All right? So it's a difference in describing time travel accurately or time travel the way you would if you were like a science fiction writer.
Got it.
All right? So if you go back in time, you're ending up in a parallel universe, all right? You're not going to be on the same timeline as you were because everything they already happened, and we have records of it. For example, you can't go back in time and save the same Titanic that we know about because it's at the bottom of the ocean floor, okay?
But you could save a Titanic in an alternate universe.
Exactly.
All right, hold on, Marshall. I've got about 1 billion more questions for you.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll get to all of them, probably not. But the one we need to find out is it possible to travel back further in time than when the time machine was created? Don't answer now. We'll get to that when we come back. Marshall Barnes, the race to build the first time machine, here on The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
Fasten your seatbelt and put your tray in the upright position. You're about to leave everything you know behind on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett.
Welcome back. Marshall Barnes is with us, and we are talking about time travel, and he's building a time machine. And get this, he's not talking about traveling into the future. I mean, we've already demonstrated that's possible, nanoseconds into the future. He's talking about time travel into the past, long thought by many physicists to be impossible. But Marshall is saying, no. They're basing that on, Einstein's theory that's 100 years old. Now, Marshall, here's to me one of the crucial questions. Is it possible to travel back further in time than when the time device is turned on?
Okay, now that's a very good question, and I want to deal with that because, first of all, what you have to understand is that when physicists say, basically what you just said, if you can't travel back in the past before the time machine's turned on, they are talking about closed time-like curves, all right? And what that is, closed time-like curves is like physicists' code language for time machine. Because basically, this is what happens in the scientific community. It's a lot like high school, okay? Everybody wants to be popular. Everybody wants to be accepted. And there's certain things that you can't do because within that community, it's just not deemed to be cool. At least it wasn't, okay? And time travel is one of those things. It's like, as soon as you start talking about, I'm thinking about doing something about time travel, all your peers are like, you feeling okay?
Yeah, they back out of the room slowly. Yeah, I know that feeling.
Right, exactly. That's the way they would treat them. Okay, now, and to me, because I'm an engineer, I don't call myself a scientist. I'm a research and development engineer, by the way, not design, development. And that's important because the development part of it means you take what you're researching and you figure out a way to make money with it, okay? So I'm not bound by the same confines as physicists who work at a university and have to worry about, like, getting tenure or something like that, or satisfying the administration above them and trying to get grants and all that kind of stuff. But basically, Kip Thorne back in 1988 said that even though a lot of physicists like science fiction subjects, they are afraid to, or at least they were at that time, to veer too close to the area of science fiction, because then the peer pressure starts. And the peer pressure in the science community makes the kind of stuff that, these jaded high school cheerleaders do to each other look like, a happy birthday party. So the bottom line is that, and then that has changed, though, over the years. It's gotten better. But for a while there, it was really, really bad. And so what that basically meant is that the same impetus to look for really cool, cutting-edge kind of things in the scientific community that didn't exist the way it did back at the beginning of the 20th century. All right?
Right.
So, I mean, how smart is that? I mean, it's like I said, these physicists like Ed Farhi, they're like talking about general relativity. I mean, general relativity came out in 1915.
Right.
It's almost 100 years old.
Exactly.
Like, what, hasn't anybody been looking at anything else?
Apparently not.
No.
So, but back
exactly.
to the...
They haven't.
But,
that's the truth.
Okay.
There's something they don't know. It's not they don't know whether it's possible. They just haven't looked. And so, to me, it's kind of like, what's that about? So, basically, I was looking. In fact, a lot of my research goes back to what people were looking at in the early 20th century. After all, that's where Einstein's unfinished unified field theory is derived from. It was like he was working on it in the early 20s initially, and he was trying to unify electromagnetism and gravity. And a lot of people in the scientific community have completely forgotten about that.
Well, that's what a lot of Tesla's work was based on, right? Was Einstein's unfinished?
No. We can't get that mixed up. Tesla stuff. In fact, Tesla thought Einstein was wrong about a lot of things. I'm not saying Einstein was wrong. I'm just saying Tesla disagreed with him.
Okay.
But Tesla was really big into electricity. Okay?
Right.
And I'm not sure. I mean, you'll hear all kinds of fantastic things about Tesla, like he had an anti-gravity machine and all kinds of unfounded stuff. But the thing about it was he was really big in electricity. He wanted to do like free energy. He wanted to transmit electricity through the air and all these kind of deals. And unfortunately, he wasn't pragmatic enough to tell J.P. Morgan, okay, we'll do this, and you can put a meter on it, but just because it's going to be free to you, just don't make it very expensive, because that would really help us out a lot. But he was too much of an idealist, and so you know the rest of the story. Right.
Okay. I don't want. Yeah. I got you to digress here, but let's back to my question as to whether it's possible. Let's say if you turn on the time machine today, could you travel back further in time than October the 14th, 2012? Could you travel back to 1581?
Okay. Great. That's a good point. No, if we just follow the path that we're working on right now, okay, it would not happen that way. All right. However, there is a separate stage that could be applied that is at this point strictly theoretical, but there's a basis for it that could possibly allow us to do that. Because, see, when I was talking about the closed time-like curve things like code for time machine, closed time-like curves are something that do appear in general relativity. And what they do is they take you back to a particular point in the past where that curve began in the first place, all right?
Right.
And there's actually even problems with the descriptions of these closed time-like curves, because some descriptions say that when you go into one, you come right back around and repeat the same thing over and over and over again. But if that happens, then really, like Stephen Hawking's idea of chronology protection conjecture comes into play. Okay, you're
going to lose the room with.
All right, sorry.
That's all right. Let me take a time out. We'll come back and we'll continue to drill down on this topic of traveling back further in time than when you turn the time machine on. Marshall Barnes is in a race to build a time machine, and we'll find out more when we come back. Don't you dare go away.
Where there's smoke, there's the Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett.
What I'm about to say won't make much sense to my affiliates listening down the line, but for those listening in the Greater Toronto area, our dear friends at Conspiracy Culture, and they're presenting a lecture, Q&A, book signing, a meet and greet with legendary researcher G. Edward Griffin. You probably are familiar with The Creature from Jekyll Island and World Without Cancer. And he is coming to Toronto Friday, November the 16th, presented by Conspiracy Culture. I will be hosting the event, introducing G. Edward. However, the topic has somewhat changed. He's not going to be talking about the Federal Reserve. He's now going to be talking about the New World Order, a second look at the United Nations. All right, that lecture has changed. It's going to be amazing, but it's not about the Federal Reserve which was the basis for his book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's going to be about the New World Order, a second look at the United Nations. Again, it's going to be an amazing lecture, and he'll be speaking on Friday, November 16th at St. Paul's, Trinity St. Paul's United Church, 427 Bloor Street. It's about a 5-minute walk from the Spadina subway, and if you want tickets, the best thing to do is just to call 416-916-1696. 1696. Conspiracyculture.com is the other way to find them. All right, back to Marshall Barnes building a time machine. Okay, so there's a caller that's on the line that wants to talk to you as well, from Jeff from Moncton.
Okay.
But I want to just make sure we finish off this last point.
Can you go back before the time machine's created?
And you're saying that there is a possibility.
Yeah, there's a possibility. It's just not based on what most physicists are talking about when they talk about time machines. They're usually talking about closed time-like curves. And in that case, no, you couldn't. So, we're talking about a different thing altogether.
But in your world, in your vision, there's a possibility.
There is a path to go down to test whether or not it might be possible.
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
Now, if you're sent to the past, can you get back? How
Sure.
are you able to?
I'll answer the question.
Yeah.
If for example, let's say you open up some kind of a wormhole to the past, okay? As long as the wormhole stays open, yeah, you can get back. Now, let's say the wormhole collapses, but because of the technology we're using, and you weren't silly enough to go back to some point in the past where, you didn't have, comparable technology. All right, then, if that happened, then you could build the machine again and come back if you knew how to do it, okay? For example, if I went back and then something happened and the machine got destroyed on this end, and as long as I was like, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, I could build it again and come back. So, that in that case it would work. If you have a vehicle and you somehow are able to go back in time, yeah, you can get back because you have the vehicle. The only problem with coming back is whether or not you have the means to do so, build another machine where you are in order to do so. People wanting to go back to ancient Egypt and ancient Rome and all this other kind of silliness, that would be very difficult. Plus the fact no one spoke English back then, so I don't know why people want to do that kind of stuff. I'd rather go back to like some other part in the, the latter part of the 20th century where I know everything that's going to happen and I know where to find the best restaurants and all that kind of stuff and have a lot of fun.
This is refreshing actually to hear someone speak about time travel in these terms. Let's go back to when when a Big Mac was 50 cents, for crying out loud. Never mind trying to see the Gettysburg Address.
No, just go to Woodstock. Let's go to
right on. Yes,
cool stuff.
But Marshall, let me ask you very quickly, and then I'll get to Jeff, who's been very patient on the line here. First of all, what are the obstacles for you to complete this? Is it funding? Is it what's the main obstacle you're facing right now?
Well, we have, again, like I said, I am a research and development engineer, so this means I have a business side to all this. So we have a business plan. We're in the process of working it, and so funding's not the same problem as it is with Dr. Mallett, who needs like $300,000 last time I talked with him in order to even get to the first stage so we can try to see if his idea even works. I couldn't spend $300,000 on this project, at least to get to the point where I can say, hey, this thing works.
All right.
You don't need that kind of money. One of the reasons why is because we already have the STTS technology, which enables us to start to do interesting things to begin with. So now it's just a matter of scaling the thing up. The amplifier that I referenced was 14,000 watts. That's like a $6,000 amplifier, okay? So that's kind of expensive. But I don't need anywhere near the money that Mallett needs.
What do you need, Marshall? What do you need?
Basically, all we need is time to conduct the research and start, scaling things up.
All right.
So in other words, I think we're going to have a conclusion, whether it's possible or not, we're going to know in less than 30 months. Probably a lot less than 30 months.
And and assuming that goes well, how soon before you could send someone backwards in time?
Well, okay, let's say that everything goes as we think it should go. Realistically, next year, we should know whether or not we can, it will really work. And then that's just in terms of getting close to how that curve's going and maybe even opening up some kind of a hole in space and time. Then comes like all the other interim stages you have to go through to figure out, okay, what are you going to do now? What are the limitations? There's a lot of research that goes into that. So, it'd be like maybe another year or two, something like that, because we don't know. We're dealing with a lot of unknown things here. I don't know. For example, radiation problems. We already know that the fan, the way it is right now, is creating ozone, but there's no high voltage involved. So we think there might be some kind of Z-Mansing effect that this warping space, the thing that's being generated, is creating. So we have to have all kinds of issues we have to deal with along the way. It's not like it's a matter of like, oh, let's get that amplifier and hook it up and crank it up all the way to 11. This is, after all, very, it's a scientific process, and we have to be careful because there are certain risks.
Right. You don't want to ramp it up to 11, as you said. Yeah. Yes. Let's send Christopher Guest back in time. All right, for those fans of Spinal Tap.
Right.
Jeff has been very patient on the line from Moncton, New Brunswick. Jeff, welcome to the Conspiracy Show.
Thank you, Richard.
Hi.
Marshall, I got a question for you.
Sure.
I don't really understand your machine. Do each one of your blades then have a magnetic field?
Okay, the entire apparatus, in terms of the axle and the blades, are enveloped in one single electromagnetic field.
Okay, and so it's emanating off of all of that?
Exactly. As a matter of fact,
and did you not consider that the EMF influence on the electric fan motor itself would?
Yeah, I did, and here's the answer. It's not connected to the motor. In fact, I demonstrate it's not connected to the motor because I'll turn the thing on. If I touch the wire, which there's an exposed wire that's copper, that's attached to the thing, and it's not attached to the motor. If it's attached to the motor, which of course has electricity going to it to make it move, I get shocked, and I don't get shocked.
No,
So
you're missing my point.
Go ahead.
The magnetic field that you're rotating a magnetic field, are you not?
No, I'm not. I keep saying it's an electromagnetic field, which is not the same as a magnetic field.
But
I'm not dealing with like what's the word? Just escaped me. I can't remember. It has to do with the motor and the copper, the stuff inside the motor and all that. It has nothing to do with that. And this is completely exterior. This is on the outside. It's not magnetic. It's electromagnetic.
But it's
and we'll also. And by the way, we've done control tests where we'll play like the radio through it with the fan turned on, and it doesn't do any of this kind of stuff. Which means it's not just because it's inside of an electromagnetic field. It's inside the STDTS electromagnetic field, which has special gravitic properties, which is why it does what it does.
So how do you separate your power sources for your light and your fan motor?
Okay, how do I separate the power sources for the light and the fan motor?
Yeah. Are they on the same panel?
For one thing, they're not part of the same apparatus. Two, they're on opposite sides of the room.
But you're running them off the same panel, though, right?
No.
So you have different electrical panels for each one of those units?
Well, you're talking about the same circuit in the building or something?
Mm-hmm.
Probably are in the same circuit. They may not be. I don't know. We haven't checked that.
That's something you might want to look at. Did you measure the light? You said that the light decreased. Did you actually measure it?
No, what we did was we videotaped it and we were analyzing the footage. And it's measurable. You can actually see the light moving across the blade as if somebody slicing pieces of it away. And so it's not a matter of like, the light is dimming or something, because the light's not dimming at all. It's like all of a sudden parts of it are missing.
Jeff, you're going somewhere with this. What do you think is happening?
Well, what I think is happening is that I think that the magnetic field, called an electromagnetic field or not, it's a magnetic field that's being generated. And that magnetic field, I believe, is affecting the fan motor. And so I think that that's what's putting the different speed on the fan motor itself. And that's why it's getting out of sync with the light, with the strobe light. But I also I question the whole relevance of being able to travel through time simply because of the experiments that they used were primarily taking the decay of a muon at 2.2 microseconds at sea level and saying that, well, it's 2.2 at sea level, but at 1.5 kilometers up, it's 6.4 microseconds. And they're saying that that's the effect of warp of space. I don't think it is. I think it's...
well, if I can interject here real quickly, you're taking a lot of things and you're mixing them up. Number one, I don't have anything to do with the muon experiment. Number two, the muon experiment had nothing to do with the warp of space. The muon experiment, if you're referring to the ones testing the special theory of relativity, had to do with time dilation, which had to do with velocity, not the warping of space. In reference to my experiment, basically what happened is, again, it's not a magnetic field. It's an electromagnetic field. And the key thing is that we did a control test. In other words, we sent an electromagnetic field from the same amplifier to the fan and to see what would happen. Nothing happened. It was just like we weren't sending a signal to it at all. It wasn't unless we sent the special STDTS signal to it that we got in these results. And which makes sense because we've done velocity tests with the STDTS signal on other things that were moving in a straight line.
Okay, I want to interject here because I don't want to get too bogged down. Jeff
Sure.
in Moncton, I appreciate the call, and I hope we'll talk to you again. Now, listen, where can people find out more about what you're doing? Can they see YouTube video? Can they see, where can they learn more about what you're doing?
The best thing to do is go to this website that's been created. It's called the Great Time Machine Race.weebly, that's WEEBLY.com. The Great Time Machine Race.weebly.com. All the information about what's starting to happen is going to be on there, both for Mallett as well as myself and my project, which is called the Verdrehung Fan.
Now, I'm guessing this is
on there. You'll see pictures. We're going to eventually start putting video on there. There's all kinds of stuff that's going to be there.
And again, you're saying that it's possible that if everything goes right over the next 30 months, you could start sending people back in time.
I caution with the people thing only because there's certain things we don't know about. But we could certainly, we're going to be sending photons and things like that back. And I thoroughly expect that. Information, maybe even small animals, I don't know. But I'm just saying that is not in the realm of impossibility.
Here's my parting question.
Sure.
And no offense, but it seems like if you were able to discover this, someone else must have at some point. And if time travel is possible, why aren't there time travelers amongst us?
All right, great. First of all, I love that because that's that Stephen Hawking thing, and I'm always a foil with Stephen Hawking. Basically what happens is this. Number one, if time travel exists, and in fact the original thing was time travel tourists. Where are all the time travel tourists? Anyone smart enough to do time travel and then turn it into a touring business, is smart enough to know if you go back in the past, you don't want people to know you're from the future because it's going to cause all kinds of problems. The other thing about it is this, and this comes down to physics. Because of parallel universes, there's a near infinite number of paths out there. So the probability that someone from the future is going to come to our particular past is rather nil, particularly if they're running a time travel business.
All right,
okay?
we got to leave it at that point.
Okay.
I think that's a great answer. And Marshall, what a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
You've left us all gobsmacked, as they say across the pond in the UK. I hope you'll come back on and talk more.
Not a problem.
Marshall Barnes. All right. And you can keep tabs on this program, whether you're a time travel tourist or not, at www.richardsarrett.com.